The grand hall of a medieval castle, a king mocks a dust-covered woman by giving her his prized stallion, a cruel jest meant to humiliate her before his laughing court. But as she mounts the royal steed with unexpected grace, something changes. The laughter dies. The nobles fall silent, for in her eyes burns a dignity no rags can disguise, a pride no mockery can diminish. "One day, my lord," she declares before riding away, "the world will remember this gesture." What begins as a simple act of royal arrogance spirals into a tale of hidden identities, forbidden truths, and a kingdom built on lies. As rumors spread through villages and whispers echo through castle corridors, one question emerges. Who is this mysterious woman who rides the king's horse with the bearing of royalty? And what secret does she hold that could bring a powerful monarch to his knees? A humiliation publica. The grand castle hall buzzed with laughter and music on that fateful evening. Chandeliers adorned with hundreds of candles cast a golden glow over the nobility, their silks and jewels shimmering as they danced and gossiped. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, sweet wines, and exotic perfumes, a stark contrast to the bitter winter wind that howled outside the stone walls. King Aldrich sat on his ornate throne, a goblet of wine in his hand, watching his court with half-closed eyes. His reputation for cruel amusement was well known throughout the kingdom, and tonight's feast celebrated another successful military campaign against a neighboring realm. The spoils of war had filled the royal coffers once again, and the nobility reveled in their shared triumph. Suddenly, the massive oak doors at the entrance of the hall creaked open. The music faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the unexpected interruption. A woman stood in the doorway, covered in dust, her clothes torn and muddied from travel. Despite her ragged appearance, something in her posture commanded attention. Her chin was held high, her gaze unflinching as it swept across the stunned assembly. The contrast was jarring, this filthy commoner daring to enter the sacred space of royal celebration. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence was suffocating. Then, someone snickered. A nobleman with a jeweled collar let out a derisive laugh, which quickly spread through the hall like wildfire. Soon the entire court was laughing at the audacity of this intruder. "Well, what have we here?" King Aldrich's voice cut through the laughter, carrying to every corner of the vast hall. He leaned forward on his throne, his eyes narrowing with curiosity and cruel amusement. "Has a street rat found its way into my castle?" The woman did not flinch at his words. Her eyes, gray as storm clouds, locked with his. There was something in that gaze, a dignity that seemed impossibly out of place with her appearance, that made the king's smile falter for just a heartbeat. Instead of ordering her removal, as everyone expected, King Aldrich did something unexpected. He rose from his throne, his tall figure commanding immediate silence from the court. With deliberate steps, he descended from the dais and approached the woman. "If you haven't even a horse to maintain your dignity," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, "then take mine." The court gasped collectively. The king's prized stallion, a magnificent beast worth more than what most peasants would see in a lifetime, was his most treasured possession. But as the reality of his words sank in, understanding dawned across the faces of the courtiers. This wasn't generosity. This was the ultimate humiliation. King Aldrich snapped his fingers, and a stable boy rushed forward, leading the magnificent white stallion into the hall. Its coat gleamed like fresh snow, its silver-adorned saddle worth a small fortune. The king took the reins and, with an exaggerated bow, presented them to the woman. "Take it," he said loudly enough for all to hear. "Perhaps it will restore some semblance of respectability to your presence." The court erupted in laughter once more. Ladies hid their giggles behind ornate fans while knights roared openly at the spectacle. This would be the gossip of the kingdom for weeks, how their clever king had mocked a presumptuous beggar woman. Yet the woman's eyes did not waver. She reached for the reins with unwavering hands, accepting them without a word of thanks, without a bow or curtsy that protocol demanded. Her pride, displayed so openly in the midst of such humiliation, caused uncomfortable murmurs to ripple through the crowd. When she mounted the royal steed, the entire hall fell silent once more. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness in her movements. She seated herself on the saddle with the practiced grace of someone born to ride. Her back straightened, her hands took the reins with confident familiarity, and suddenly, alarmingly, she no longer looked like a beggar at all. The laughter died in throats. Discomfort replaced amusement. Several nobles exchanged confused glances, suddenly uncertain of what they were witnessing. A few observant courtiers noticed details they had missed before: the way she carried herself, the perfect posture of her spine, the aristocratic lift of her chin. These were not the mannerisms of a common woman. King Aldric's smile faded. A strange sensation crept up his spine, something akin to doubt. Something about this woman was not as it seemed, and for the first time that evening, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. Before he could speak, before he could reconsider his impulsive gesture, the woman looked down at him from atop his prized stallion. Her eyes, previously guarded, now held a spark of something dangerous. Perhaps triumph, perhaps a promise. "One day, my lord," she declared, her voice clear and measured, carrying to every corner of the now silent hall, "the world will remember this gesture." Without waiting for dismissal, she turned the horse with expert precision and rode out through the open doors, leaving behind a court frozen in confused silence, and a king whose mocking smile had completely vanished. As the doors closed behind her, whispers erupted throughout the hall. Who was she? What had they just witnessed? And what did she mean by her final words? King Aldric returned to his throne, his mood darkened, his mind troubled. Something about the woman's eyes haunted him, a familiarity he couldn't place. He called for more wine, but the celebration had lost its luster. In trying to humiliate a stranger, he sensed he might have made a grave mistake. Outside, under the cold light of the moon, the woman rode the king's magnificent stallion away from the castle, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. The game had only just begun. O sussurro de fera. Dawn broke over the kingdom with tongues already wagging. In every village square, at every market stall, and across every tavern counter, the tale of the previous night's spectacle spread like wildfire through dry brush. The morning mist had barely lifted when the gossip began to reach even the most remote corners of the realm. "The king gave his horse to a beggar woman," declared a butcher's wife as she arranged her cuts of meat in the village square. Her words carried across the bustling marketplace, drawing curious onlookers who hungered for details more than they did for her wares. "I heard she walked straight into the great hall, bold as brass," added a blacksmith, pausing his work to join the growing circle of gossip mongers. The rhythmic clanging of his hammer fell silent as he leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Straight through the guards, past the nobles, right up to His Majesty himself." An elderly cheese merchant shook her head in disbelief. No commoner would dare. She'd be dragged to the dungeons before taking 3 steps. The conversation rippled outward, growing with each retelling. By midday, the story had transformed into a theatrical performance, with villagers mimicking what they imagined to be the king's shocked expression, the woman's audacity, the courtiers' gasps of surprise. Yet beneath the louder voices, quieter observations circulated. A tavern keeper who had once served in the castle kitchens whispered to his trusted patrons, "That was no beggar. There was something different about her." "How do you mean?" asked a traveling merchant, his interest piqued. "The way she carried herself," the tavern keeper replied, glancing over his shoulder as if the castle walls might have ears even here, leagues away. "Like royalty in disguise. My sister's husband's cousin works in the stables. Says she rode out on the king's stallion like she'd been born in the saddle." These murmurings traveled through the kingdom's veins, eventually reaching the stone corridors of the castle itself, where they disturbed the carefully maintained image of the monarch. Servants whispered between tasks, falling silent whenever nobility approached. Guards exchanged knowing glances during shift changes. The reputation of King Aldric, built on fear and respect, began to waver ever so slightly as the tale of his impulsive gesture spread. The king himself paced his private chambers, his boots echoing against the stone floor. The morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting multicolored patterns that he hardly noticed in his agitation. His closest advisor, Lord Cedric, stood near the doorway, watching with concern. "This is becoming a problem, Your Majesty," Lord Cedric ventured cautiously. "The people speak of little else." King Aldric's jaw tightened. "Let them gossip. By week's end, they'll have found some new scandal to occupy their simple minds." "I'm not certain, sire. This tale has particular appeal. A king humbled, however briefly, by a mysterious woman." Lord Cedric chose his words carefully, aware of his monarch's volatile temper. "There is something about her that has captured the imagination of your subjects." The king turned sharply. "What do you mean, something about her?" Before Lord Cedric could respond, a knock at the chamber door interrupted them. A knight entered, bowing low before speaking. "Your Majesty, I bring word from the marketplace. Unless it concerns taxation or rebellion, I have no interest in marketplace gossip." The king snapped. The knight hesitated. "It concerns the woman, sire. The one from last night." The room fell silent. King Aldric's irritation gave way to something harder to define. Curiosity mingled with unease. "Speak," he commanded. "A merchant from the eastern provinces has been talking, Your Majesty. He claims the woman bears a striking resemblance to someone he once saw in a royal procession from the neighboring kingdom of Aldenvale." In that moment, tension filled the room like smoke before a fire. Aldenvale, the very kingdom against which King Aldric had recently waged his successful campaign. The kingdom whose royal family had mysteriously vanished during the conflict, presumed dead in the chaos of war. "What exactly is this merchant saying?" Lord Cedric asked, his voice suddenly tight. "That she carries herself like nobility, my lord. That her features remind him of—" The knight lowered his voice. "The lost royal family." King Aldric's face remained impassive, but his fingers curled into a fist at his side. "Who has heard these rumors?" "Many, Your Majesty. The merchant speaks freely in the taverns." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The possibility hung in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. If this woman was indeed of noble birth from Aldenvale, then the king's public mockery took on an entirely different meaning. What had seemed a moment of royal wit could transform into a diplomatic catastrophe. Lord Cedric, torn between loyalty to his king and concern for the realm, made a decision. "With your permission, sire, I will investigate this matter personally, discreetly." The king nodded slowly, his mind already calculating the potential consequences. "Do so, and find that woman. I want to know who she is, where she came from, and where she has gone with my horse." As the knight bowed and departed, King Aldric moved to the window overlooking the kingdom. In the distance he could see the bustling marketplace, the tiny figures of his subjects going about their daily lives, unaware of the sudden uncertainty that had taken root in the castle. Meanwhile, far from the castle walls, the mysterious woman rode through small villages astride the magnificent royal stallion. She made no effort to conceal herself or the distinctive mount, quite the opposite. She rode proudly through village squares, pausing occasionally to speak with commoners, her demeanor both approachable and undeniably regal. Children gaped at the beautiful horse with its ornate saddle bearing the royal crest. Adults whispered behind their hands, recognizing the king's prized stallion and wondering at the woman who controlled it with such ease. "She rides like she was born to it," murmured a farmer to his wife as they watched her pass. "No one sits a horse like that without royal blood. Look at her hands," his wife replied softly. "Clean and smooth beneath the travel dirt. Those aren't a peasant's hands." The rumors spread from village to village, growing more elaborate with each telling. Some said she was a foreign princess. Others claimed she was a spirit of justice, come to test the king. A few even whispered that she was the rightful queen of their own land. As evening fell, news reached the castle that crowds were gathering wherever the woman appeared, drawn by curiosity and something more dangerous: hope. The people saw in her something they rarely witnessed: dignity that required no crown, authority that needed no throne. In his chambers, King Aldric received this report with growing alarm. What had begun as a moment of royal caprice was swiftly becoming a threat to his authority. His face darkened as he issued a command to his most trusted knights. "Find her, discover who she truly is, and do it quietly." The knights bowed and departed, their mission clear: As night fell over the kingdom, the hunt for the mysterious woman began in earnest. O retrato escondido. The castle's western tower housed chambers that few were permitted to enter. Dusty corridors led to rooms filled with artifacts from the kingdom's turbulent history, spoils of war, diplomatic gifts, and relics whose significance had faded with passing generations. Here, in the dim light of a single torch, King Aldrich paced nervously while his oldest advisor, Master Edmund, rifled through stacks of forgotten paintings. Master Edmund had served 3 kings before Aldrich. His hunched back and gnarled hands spoke of decades spent poring over manuscripts and state documents. At 83 years of age, he was the only person alive who remembered the peace that had once existed between this kingdom and Aldenvale. "I know it's here somewhere, Your Majesty," he muttered, his voice thin with age. "I saw it last when your father ordered all Aldenvale portraits removed from public view." King Aldrich's patience wore thin. "What exactly are we searching for, old man? You've dragged me to this forsaken tower with cryptic warnings but little explanation." Master Edmund paused, fixing the king with rheumy eyes that still held surprising sharpness. "I fear, sire, that your jester's game with the strange woman may have consequences beyond your imagining." Before the king could retort, Edmund pulled a cloth-covered frame from behind a stack of moldering books. With trembling hands, he removed the protective covering, revealing a portrait that had not seen light in nearly 20 years. "There," he whispered, holding the torch closer. "The lost princess of Aldenvale." The painting depicted a young woman of perhaps 12 years, barely more than a child. Her hair was arranged in elaborate braids, and she wore the ceremonial dress of Aldenvale royalty. But it was her expression that commanded attention. Proud eyes that seemed to challenge the viewer, and a firm set to her jaw that spoke of determination beyond her years. King Aldrich stared at the portrait, color draining from his face. "This cannot be the same woman." "The princess would be 26 now," Edmund said quietly. "The age matches, and look at the eyes, sire. The same defiant gaze, the same proud lift of the chin." The king's blood ran cold. He had grown up hearing tales of Princess Alara, heir to the Aldenvale throne. When war broke out between the kingdoms, reports claimed the entire royal family had perished when their castle was besieged. No bodies were recovered, but none had questioned the presumed deaths. It had been politically convenient for all parties. If she lives, the implications hung in the air, too dangerous to voice aloud. Master Edmund nodded gravely. "If she is who I believe her to be, then she is the rightful ruler of Aldenvale, territories that your armies now occupy, territories whose resources have doubled your treasury's wealth." The king paced the small chamber, his mind racing. This is absurd. A coincidental resemblance, nothing more. The princess died with her family. Did she? Edmund challenged gently. No body was ever found. There were rumors of a child escaping with loyal servants. Rumors your father dismissed as wishful thinking. Aldrich stopped abruptly, turning to face his advisor. "You speak of things long buried, things best left undisturbed. If this woman is truly Princess Alara," Edmund pressed on, his voice gaining strength, "then humiliating her publicly was more than a moment of royal amusement, sire. It was potentially an act that could unite your enemies against you." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. "If she is who you suspect," King Aldrich finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "then her existence threatens everything. The peace treaties, the territorial claims. My entire reign could be called into question." Master Edmund placed the portrait carefully on a table, his expression solemn. "Indeed, sire. Humiliating this woman may cost more than your honor. It may cost your kingdom." The weight of these words filled the chamber. For the first time since ascending to the throne, King Aldrich felt truly vulnerable. The power he wielded, the crown, the armies, the vast territories, suddenly seemed fragile as glass in the face of a legitimate claim from a surviving heir. "What would you have me do?" he asked, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Find her before your enemies do," Edmund advised. "Discover the truth of her identity. and pray to the gods that she is merely a commoner with unusual bearing. As King Aldrich descended from the tower, the portrait's eyes seemed to follow him, challenging him from across the years. He felt as though the foundations of his rule were shifting beneath his feet, like sand washed away by an incoming tide. Meanwhile, in a humble tavern on the kingdom's eastern edge, the mysterious woman sat alone in a shadowy corner. She had stabled the king's magnificent horse behind the establishment, drawing curious stares from the tavern's patrons. Despite her still ragged appearance, there was something in her demeanor that kept the usual tavern harassment at bay. No one dared approach her uninvited. She sipped watered wine from a wooden cup, her eyes constantly surveying the room. Travelers and local farmers filled the benches, their conversations revolving around harvests, taxes, and, increasingly, rumors of the woman who had humiliated the king. "They say she rode straight into the castle and demanded an audience," a tanner whispered too loudly to his companion. "I heard the king tried to have her arrested, but she escaped on his own horse," another added, embellishing the tale further. The woman allowed herself a small smile at these exaggerations, but kept her eyes downcast. Her fingers absently traced a pattern on the rough wooden table, a pattern that, to the educated eye, would have been recognizable as the royal crest of Aldenvale. An elderly woman entered the tavern, leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. Her white hair was tied in a simple knot, and her clothes, while clean, spoke of a life of modest means. She ordered a small ale and scanned the room with the sharp eyes of someone half her age. When her gaze fell upon the mysterious woman in the corner, she froze. The pewter mug slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor and splashing ale across the rushes. "It cannot be," she gasped, loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. The mysterious woman looked up, her eyes narrowing as they met the older woman's stunned expression. Recognition flickered between them, subtle but unmistakable. "It's her," the old woman whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden hush. "The princess who lost everything." The whisper rippled through the tavern like a stone dropped in still water. Conversation ceased. All eyes turned toward the corner where the mysterious woman sat, her posture now rigid, her expression unreadable. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Then, with deliberate movements, the mysterious woman rose from her seat and approached the elderly woman. She took the older woman's trembling hands in her own. "You mistake me for someone else, good mother," she said, her voice gentle but firm, loud enough for all to hear, yet somehow intimate. "I am but a traveler passing through." But the old woman's eyes filled with tears. "I was there," she whispered. "I served in the kitchens at Aldenvale Castle. I would know those eyes anywhere. You have your mother's gaze, child." The mysterious woman's expression remained controlled, but something flickered behind her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. With surprising strength, she helped the elderly woman to a seat and signaled for fresh ale. "You speak of ghosts," she said softly, though several eager listeners leaned closer to catch her words. "The royal family of Aldenvale is no more." The old woman clutched at the younger's hands. "Some say ghosts walk when justice remains undone." A tense silence followed, broken only when the tavern door swung open. A merchant entered, his rich clothes marking him as someone of means. His eyes widened as they fell upon the mysterious woman, and he quickly ducked back outside without ordering a drink. The mysterious woman noticed. Her expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into careful neutrality once more. She leaned close to the elderly woman, whispering something in her ear that made the older woman's eyes widen with surprise. Then, leaving a silver coin on the table, far more than necessary for the untouched wine, she rose and made her way toward the exit. The tavern's patrons parted before her, some bowing their heads slightly without even realizing they did so. Outside, the merchant was already mounted on a swift horse, heading toward the capital with news that would set the kingdom ablaze with speculation and fear. Inside the tavern, the elderly woman sat motionless, clutching something small in her weathered hand. A signet ring bearing the royal crest of Aldenvale, pressed into her palm by the mysterious woman during their brief exchange. "She has returned," the old woman whispered to herself. "The true queen has returned. O peso da vergonha." 3 days had passed since the incident in the Great Hall, and King Aldrich found himself increasingly isolated in his own castle. As he walked through the corridors, he noticed how conversations faltered when he approached, how nobles suddenly found fascinating patterns in the stone floor rather than meet his gaze. Behind cupped hands and ornate fans, whispers followed him like shadows. The sovereign who gave his horse to a beggar. They snickered when they thought he couldn't hear. Lord Harwick, a portly nobleman with a penchant for gossip, held court among his sycophants in an alcove near the library. His voice carried more than he realized. Can you imagine? His Majesty's prized stallion, worth more than some of our estates, handed to a filthy commoner as a jest. Harwick's laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling. One wonders who truly looked the fool in that exchange. The laughter died abruptly when King Aldrich rounded the corner, his face a mask of controlled fury. The nobles scattered like startled birds, bowing deeply as they retreated. Once, such disrespect would have been unthinkable. Once, his mere presence commanded deference bordering on fear. Now he had become the subject of veiled mockery in his own court. The humiliation burned like acid in his veins. But worse than the nobles' snickering was the growing anxiety that festered beneath it all. For now, the whispers from the villages and markets had reached the castle walls, murmurs that the woman might be more than she appeared, that she might, in fact, be the lost princess of Aldenvale. When these rumors first reached the nobility, the laughter had stopped. The mocking smiles had faded. The court had grown very quiet indeed, as the implications settled over them like a shroud. If she were truly Princess Alara, heir to the Aldenvale throne, then King Aldrich had not merely made a fool of himself, he had committed an act of profound political significance. He had publicly humiliated the rightful ruler of territories his armies now occupied. Territories whose resources had filled his treasury and funded the very feast where the incident occurred. In his private chambers, Aldrich poured himself a goblet of wine with shaking hands. The cup felt heavy, the wine bitter on his tongue. He who had always controlled others now found himself prisoner to his own impulsive cruelty. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Master Edmund entered, his ancient face grave. "The reports continue to arrive, sire," he said, placing a stack of parchments on the table, "from every corner of the kingdom." Aldrich didn't need to read them. "She's making no attempt to hide herself, is she?" "None whatsoever, Your Majesty." "Quite the opposite. She rides your royal stallion through village squares in broad daylight. She speaks with commoners in marketplaces. She dines openly in taverns." "And the people? What do they say of her?" Master Edmund hesitated, choosing his words with care. "They are drawn to her, sire. There is something in her manner that inspires both respect and affection. The common folk speak of her dignity, her kindness. Do they speak of Aldenvale? Of Princess Alara?" "Some do, Your Majesty. The rumors grow stronger each day." King Aldrich slammed his goblet down, wine splashing like blood across the parchments. "And she does nothing to deny these claims?" Here, Master Edmund's expression grew troubled. "That, sire, is perhaps most concerning of all. When directly questioned about her identity, she neither confirms nor denies. She offers ambiguous responses that could be interpreted either way. But her manner, yes, her manner is increasingly royal." The tension in the room thickened. Both men understood the dangerous game unfolding across the kingdom. With each passing day, with each village she visited, the mysterious woman was building a presence that threatened the very foundations of Aldrich's rule. "She is playing a precarious game," the king muttered, more to himself than his advisor. "If she openly declares herself Princess Alara without proof, she risks being branded a traitor and impostor." "And if she has such proof?" Master Edmund asked quietly. King Aldrich had no answer. In a small village 2 days' ride from the castle, the mysterious woman sat beneath an ancient oak tree in the village square. Children gathered around her as she told stories of distant lands. Farmers and craftsmen paused in their work to listen from a respectful distance. The king's magnificent stallion grazed contentedly nearby, its presence a constant reminder of the tale that had spread throughout the realm. The woman's appearance had changed subtly since her dramatic entrance to the castle. Though her clothes remained simple, They were now clean and well-mended. Her hair, washed of dust and grime, revealed its true color, a rich auburn that caught the sunlight like polished copper. But it was her demeanor that had transformed most strikingly. Each gesture, each word seemed imbued with quiet authority. As she finished her tale, a young girl approached with hesitant steps. "My grandmother says you're a princess," the child said, wide-eyed and solemn. "Are you?" A hush fell over the gathering. Adults leaned forward imperceptibly, eager to hear her response. The woman smiled gently, considering the girl with thoughtful eyes. "What do you think makes someone royal, little one?" she asked instead of answering directly. The girl frowned, pondering the question with childish seriousness. "A crown? Fine clothes?" "Perhaps," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly to all listeners. "But I have known those with crowns who had no nobility in their souls, and I have known those in rags who carried themselves with more dignity than any king." She reached out, touching the child's cheek with gentle fingers. "True royalty, little one, lives in how we treat others, in the courage we show when faced with cruelty, in the mercy we offer when vengeance would be easier." The gathered villagers nodded in solemn agreement. Many eyes glistened with unshed tears at words that spoke directly to their hardship-filled lives. "But you didn't answer," the child persisted with the directness of youth. "Are you a princess?" The woman's smile deepened, taking on an enigmatic quality that would be discussed in hushed tones around village fires that night. "I am what circumstances have made me," she replied, "and what I choose to become despite those circumstances." With that, she rose gracefully to her feet, effectively ending the conversation while satisfying no one's curiosity. Yet something in her posture, in the way she surveyed the village square, reinforced the growing conviction among the observers that they stood in the presence of someone extraordinary. A village elder stepped forward, bowing slightly. "You honor us with your presence, my lady. Will you not stay another night? Our homes are humble, but you would be welcome at any hearth." Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. Riders approached, knights in the king's colors, moving with purposeful speed. The mysterious woman observed their approach with calm assessment, showing neither surprise nor fear. "It seems I am summoned," she said quietly. "Thank you for your kindness, good people of Oakvale. I shall not forget it." With fluid grace, she mounted the king's stallion without assistance. The great beast responded instantly to her touch, as though the two shared a silent understanding. The villagers drew back, forming a respectful circle as the knights entered the square. The lead knight removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face beneath graying hair. "My lady," he said, his tone careful, neither commanding nor deferential. "His Majesty King Aldrich requests your presence at the castle." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was no arrest, no forced return of stolen property. This was a formal invitation, a recognition of status that spoke volumes. The woman inclined her head slightly. "And does His Majesty address his invitation to a nameless beggar, Sir Knight? Or does he now wish to know whom he truly welcomed to his court?" The knight's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed discomfort. "His Majesty requests the honor of your company, my lady. He wishes to correct any misunderstanding that may have occurred." "How diplomatic," she replied, a hint of irony coloring her voice. "Please inform your king that I shall attend him tomorrow. Tonight I have promised stories to the children of Oakvale." The knight hesitated, clearly torn between his orders and the unexpected response. Finally he bowed his head in acquiescence. "As you wish, my lady. We shall escort you at first light." As the knights withdrew to the village perimeter to make camp for the night, the villagers stared at the woman with newfound awe. No one refused a royal summons. No one made the king's knights wait upon their convenience. No one except perhaps someone of equal or greater rank. That night, as promised, she told stories to the children by firelight. But the tales she chose, of rightful heirs reclaiming stolen birthrights, of justice long delayed but finally delivered, sent a clear message that traveled far beyond the village boundaries. The king's knights listened from the shadows, their expressions grim. By morning, news of this exchange would reach the castle, adding yet another layer to the growing legend of the mysterious woman and the increasingly anxious monarch who had once mocked her. O confronto silenzioso. The great hall of the castle had been transformed since the night of the feast. Gone were the musicians, the abundant wine, the raucous laughter of nobles. In their place hung a tension so thick it seemed to press against the stone walls. Courtiers lined the edges of the room, their faces carefully composed, their eyes darting between their king and the enormous oak doors through which their mysterious visitor would soon enter. King Aldrich sat rigidly upon his throne, dressed in his most formal regalia. The crown that adorned his head, heavier today than it had ever felt, gleamed in the afternoon light that streamed through the high windows. At his side stood Master Edmund and Lord Cedric, both looking grave. None spoke. The waiting had stretched their nerves taut as bowstrings. When at last the doors swung open, the collective intake of breath was audible. The woman who entered bore little resemblance to the dust-covered figure who had stood in the same spot days earlier. Though her clothing remained simple, a dress of fine but unadorned blue wool, she moved with unmistakable grace. Her auburn hair was braided simply, adorned with nothing more than a single white flower. Most striking was her expression, calm, composed, utterly self-possessed. And walking beside her, a half-step behind, were 3 villagers from Oakvale, ordinary folk who had no place in a royal court, but who had insisted on accompanying her. Their presence, a silent statement of common support, caused murmurs of surprise among the assembled nobility. The woman advanced across the hall with measured steps, the king's stallion no longer necessary to command the attention of every person present. She stopped at the precise distance that protocol demanded, not too close to show disrespect, not too far to suggest fear. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, with deliberate care, the woman executed a curtsy of such perfect form that several older courtiers gasped softly. It was not the curtsy of a commoner who had been hastily coached, but the practiced movement of someone trained from childhood in royal etiquette. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the vast hall, "I thank you for your invitation." King Aldrich studied her, his expression inscrutable. "You have been riding my kingdom on my horse." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "As you commanded, sire. You gave me your stallion before your entire court. I merely honored your generosity." Titters of nervous laughter were quickly suppressed throughout the hall. The king's fingers tightened on the armrests of his throne. "I find myself at a disadvantage," he said carefully. "You know who I am, yet I do not know who addresses me." The woman straightened, her posture impeccable. "And therein lies our first quandary, Your Majesty. For I wonder, shall I address you by the title your father taught me when we were both children?" The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled court. King Aldrich visibly stiffened, color draining from his face. Behind him, Master Edmund closed his eyes briefly, as though a feared prophecy had come to pass. "You claim acquaintance with my father?" the king asked, his voice tightly controlled. "I claim many things, sire," she replied, "most of which would be better discussed in more private circumstances." King Aldrich rose from his throne, his decision made in an instant. "Leave us," he commanded, his eyes never leaving the woman's face. "All of you!" Protest immediately erupted from his advisors. "Your Majesty, protocol dictates," began Lord Cedric. "I said leave." The king's voice cracked like a whip. Reluctantly, the court began to file out. The villagers who had accompanied the woman hesitated, looking to her for guidance. With a gentle nod, she dismissed them as well. Only when the massive doors closed, leaving just the woman, the king, and Master Edmund in the cavernous hall, did the tension shift from public spectacle to something more dangerous, intimate confrontation. King Aldrich descended the steps from his throne slowly, circling the woman as one might circle an unexploded device from a foreign war. "You play a dangerous game," he said quietly. "Implying royal connections could be considered treason." "Is it treason to speak the truth?" she countered, turning to follow his movement, refusing to let him position himself behind her. "Or is treason the act of denying rightful claims to power?" The king stopped his circling, facing her directly. "Speak plainly. Who are you?" She lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering. My lord, or should I address you by the title your father taught me when we were children? Her voice softened, taking on a cadence from long ago. Little Prince Aldrich, who couldn't properly hold a sword until I showed him the correct grip during summer visits between our kingdoms. The king's legs visibly weakened. He reached for a nearby chair, gripping its back for support. What she had revealed was impossible for anyone to know. The royal children of neighboring kingdoms had indeed played together during diplomatic visits, far from public eyes. And the story of the sword lesson was a private humiliation that the young prince had sworn all present to secrecy about. "Ilara?" he whispered, the name barely audible. For the first time, emotion cracked her composed exterior. Pain flashed across her features, quickly mastered. "So you do remember." Master Edmund stepped forward. "Your Highness," he addressed her, formally acknowledging what the king had just confirmed. "We believed the entire royal family of Aldenvale perished in the siege." "As was intended," she replied, "a convenient tragedy that eliminated all rightful claimants to a wealthy kingdom." The king found his voice again. "I had no part in that attack. I was not yet crowned when your father's armies surrounded our castle." Her tone remained measured, but ice had crept into it. "When they slaughtered my family and our loyal servants, when I was smuggled out by a kitchen boy who died protecting me." She took a step closer to Aldrich. "No, you were not king then, but you have happily ruled over stolen lands ever since." The weight of history and accusation filled the hall. King Aldrich turned away, unable to meet her gaze. "What do you want? Revenge? To publicly shame me?" "I want neither," she replied, her voice softening fractionally. "The throne that was stolen from me will not be reclaimed through force, but through truth. And that truth now rests in your hands." The implication was clear. She was placing her fate, perhaps her very life, at his mercy. The realization staggered him. Master Edmund spoke into the tense silence. "Your Highness, forgiveness is—" "Do not speak to me of forgiveness," she interrupted, though without anger. "I watched my mother die. I lived as a servant, then a beggar, then a seamstress, and a dozen other humble professions to survive. I have spent years gathering allies, building support, waiting for the moment to reclaim what is mine." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Forgiveness may come, but justice must come first." King Aldrich turned back to her, conflict evident in every line of his face. The proud monarch who had mockingly given his horse to a beggar was now trapped in a web of history, politics, and his own actions. If he acknowledged her claim publicly, his legitimacy over the annexed territories would collapse. If he denied her, or worse, imprisoned her, he risked making her a martyr around whom rebellion could crystallize. The duality between royal pride and dawning shame consumed him. He had humiliated her before his entire court, and now found himself hostage to her presence, her claim, her very existence. "Why reveal yourself now?" he asked finally. "Why not continue building your support in secret?" A sad smile touched her lips. "Your gesture with the horse forced my hand. Had you simply ignored me or had me removed, I would have continued my quiet work. But you chose public mockery, and in doing so, gave me your most recognized symbol of power to ride throughout your kingdom." The irony was not lost on him. His own arrogance had accelerated a crisis that might have remained dormant for years. "What happens now?" he asked, the question of a man, not a king. Princess Ilara's expression hardened. "Now, Your Majesty, we negotiate. But know this, I hold a secret that could destroy not just your rule, but the entire kingdom." The threat hung in the air between them, all the more potent for its vagueness. "What secret?" King Aldrich demanded, fear edging his voice. "A document," she said simply. "Written proof of my lineage and my claims, bearing seals that cannot be disputed. Hidden where your father would never have dared to look." Master Edmund inhaled sharply, understanding the implications. Such a document, if revealed at the wrong time or to the wrong people, could trigger not just a crisis of succession, but outright war with neighboring kingdoms who had their own interests in Aldenvale's rich territories. King Aldrich stared at the woman before him. No longer a mysterious stranger, but a living embodiment of his family's sins, his kingdom's precarious foundations. In her eyes, he saw not just a claim to power, but a lifetime of suffering that he had inadvertently crowned with public humiliation. "You will dine with me tonight," he said finally, making it neither a request nor a command. "We have much to discuss, Princess Elara of Aldenvale." With those words, spoken in the empty great hall, King Aldrich formally acknowledged her identity, a first tentative step toward an uncertain future where crowns might shift and kingdoms might transform in ways neither of them could yet imagine. A primera reviravolta. Candlelight flickered across the private dining chamber, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the tension filling the room. King Aldrich and Princess Elara sat across from each other at a table laden with the finest foods the castle kitchens could produce: roasted pheasant, freshly baked bread, honeyed fruits, and wines from the royal cellars. Yet neither had eaten more than a few mouthfuls. The meal was merely a backdrop for a more significant exchange. Master Edmund had withdrawn to a corner, present as both witness and advisor. His ancient eyes moved between the two royals, watching their verbal sparring with the careful attention of one who understood that kingdoms might rise or fall on the words spoken this night. "You claim to have documentary proof of your identity," King Aldrich said, breaking a silence that had stretched uncomfortably. "Yet in the years since Aldenvale fell, no such evidence has ever surfaced." Princess Elara sipped her wine, her eyes never leaving his face. "That was by design, Your Majesty. What value would such proof have held when I was a child fleeing assassins? It would have been my death warrant. And now? Now it may be my salvation. Or yours." She set down her goblet with deliberate care. "I have the proof written of my bloodline, hidden where your father would never have dared to look." The words fell between them like a thunderclap, echoing in the chamber. King Aldrich leaned forward, his knuckles white against the dark wood of the table. "Speak plainly," he demanded. "What document could possibly carry such weight after all these years?" Princess Elara's expression remained composed, but a dangerous spark lit her eyes. "I have the treaty your father signed with mine, the original parchment with both royal seals, the one that promised mutual defense, shared borders, and—" She paused meaningfully. "Betrothals between our houses to unite the kingdoms through marriage rather than conquest." The king's face drained of color. "That treaty was destroyed in the fire that conveniently consumed our records chamber," she interrupted. "No, Aldrich. My father was wiser than that. He kept the original elsewhere, entrusted to hands your father would never suspect." The revelation hung in the air like smoke, suffocating, impossible to wave away. If such a document existed, with intact royal seals and signatures, it would prove not only Elara's identity, but also establish that the war between their kingdoms had violated a binding royal agreement. It would expose the conquest of Aldenvale as not a legitimate military campaign, but an act of treachery against a sworn ally. "You're lying," the king said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Princess Elara leaned forward. "Shall I describe the treaty in detail? The unique watermark of twin falcons on the parchment, the unusual red-gold blend of your father's seal wax, the clause about winter wheat tariffs that your court scribe misspelled twice." With each specific detail, Aldrich's certainty crumbled further. These were elements only someone who had seen the actual document would know. "If what you say is true," he said carefully, "then you've hidden this document for 15 years, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal it." "I've waited for justice," she corrected him, "not revenge. There's a difference that your father never understood." The king rose from his chair, pacing the chamber in agitation. "And what would this justice look like, Princess? The unraveling of 15 years of rule, war, chaos? That depends entirely on you." Her voice remained calm, controlled. "On whether you're more your father's son or your own man." Before King Aldrich could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Without waiting for permission, Lord Cedric burst into the chamber, his face flushed with urgency. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there's trouble," he said, bowing hastily. His eyes darted to Princess Elara, widening in surprise to find her dining privately with the king. "What trouble?" Aldrich demanded. Lord Cedric hesitated, clearly uncomfortable speaking freely before the princess. "Speak," the king commanded. "There's been talk among certain nobles, sire. They've caught wind of the lady's possible identity." He glanced nervously at Alara. "Duke Harwick and Baron Thornfeld have been gathering supporters in the East Wing. They're saying that recognizing any claim from Aldenvale would threaten their land grants in the annexed territories." The implication was clear. A faction of nobles was forming against the possibility of Princess Alara being acknowledged. Nobles whose wealth and power derived directly from lands seized during the conquest of her kingdom. "How did they discover this?" the king demanded. "The merchant who recognized her in the tavern, sire. It seems he has connections to Duke Harwick's household." Princess Alara showed no surprise at this news. "Your nobles fear a woman's claim more than they fear dishonor," she observed quietly. "They would rather protect stolen lands than face the truth." "They don't want you to restore what was taken," Master Edmund added from his corner, speaking for the first time since the meal began. "And they certainly don't want a woman ascending to power, particularly one who has seen life from the perspective of the common people." King Aldrich's face darkened. "Harwick oversteps. He has no right to form factions in my castle." "Yet he does so," Alara noted. "Perhaps your hold on power isn't as absolute as you believed." The king turned to her sharply, suspicion flaring. "Did you plan this? Reveal yourself to key figures, knowing they would oppose you and force my hand?" A hint of a smile touched her lips. "I planned many things, Your Majesty, but the greed and fear of your nobles requires no manipulation from me. It flourishes quite naturally in the soil of ill-gotten gains." Outside the chamber windows, torchlight flickered in the courtyard below. Raised voices carried faintly upward, evidence of unusual activity for this hour. The conspiracy was not waiting for daylight. Lord Cedric moved closer to the king, lowering his voice. "Sire, there's more. The commoners who accompanied the princess, they've been speaking with the castle servants. Word of her identity is spreading below stairs as well as above. But the response is different." "How so?" asked the king. "The servants whisper her name with hope, sire. The stable boys, the kitchen maids, the guards. They see in her something they've never seen before." "What?" Aldrich's voice was barely audible. "A ruler who has known hunger, who has worked with her hands, who understands their lives." Lord Cedric looked uncomfortable delivering this truth. "They say she speaks to them as equals." Princess Alara watched this exchange with calm assessment. She had said nothing to encourage such talk among the castle staff, yet the narrative was building itself around her presence. A narrative far more dangerous to the established order than any document could be. King Aldrich turned to the window, staring out at the growing commotion in the courtyard below. He found himself trapped in a rapidly closing vice. Nobles conspiring to protect their interests on one side, common folk finding dangerous inspiration on the other, and sitting calmly at his table, the living embodiment of his family's greatest betrayal. "The document you speak of," he said without turning. "Where is it?" "Safe," Princess Alara replied, "beyond the reach of those who would destroy it." "And if I were to acknowledge your identity publicly? What then?" "Then we would negotiate the future of both our kingdoms. Peacefully." He turned back to face her. "And if I refuse? If I declare you an impostor and have you imprisoned?" Her gaze remained steady, unflinching. "Then the document finds its way to every neighboring court, every merchant guild, every township square. And with it, the full account of how your father betrayed his sworn ally, murdered a royal family, and seized their lands in violation of a sacred treaty." She leaned forward slightly. "How long would your crown remain secure once that story spreads, I wonder?" The threat needed no elaboration. Such a revelation would not only delegitimize Aldrich's rule over the annexed territories, but could potentially trigger intervention from other kingdoms who would see opportunity in the chaos. Master Edmund stepped forward from the shadows. "Sire, if I may, there is wisdom in finding a path that preserves stability while acknowledging truth." Before the king could respond, the chamber door burst open again. This time, a captain of the royal guard entered, his face grim. "Your Majesty, armed men have been spotted gathering at the eastern postern gate, Duke Harwick's men by their colors." The king's eyes narrowed. Treason, then. He moves against me directly. Not against you, sire, the captain corrected carefully. Their target appears to be the lady's chambers. They mean to seize her before any official recognition can be given. Princess Alara rose from her seat, her composure unbroken despite the clear threat to her life. It seems, Your Majesty, that events force your hand faster than either of us anticipated. Your nobles have decided they would rather commit murder under your roof than risk losing their ill-gotten privileges. King Aldrich stared at her, seeing not just the princess before him, but the accumulated weight of 15 years of rule built upon his father's treachery. In this moment, the choice before him was not merely political but moral, a crossroads that would define not just his reign, but his soul. "Captain," he said, his voice hardening with decision, "secure the lady's safety at all costs. Any who threaten her are to be considered in direct violation of royal protection." The captain saluted and hurried out. Lord Cedric looked startled at this clear indication of the king's position. "And what of Duke Harwick, sire?" King Aldrich's expression darkened. "Inform him that I will address the court at dawn tomorrow. All nobles are commanded to attend." He turned to Princess Alara. "By then we must reach an understanding that preserves the stability of the realm while addressing the wrongs of the past." "And if we cannot?" she asked quietly. "Then we both lose everything," he answered simply, "and those who would use our conflict for their own ends will be the only victors." As they stood facing each other across the chamber, the sounds of confrontation echoed from distant corridors, the opening skirmishes in a battle that would determine far more than just who sat upon a throne. A segunda reviravolta e climax. Midnight shadows stretched across the castle grounds, elongating into grotesque shapes that mirrored the chaos unfolding within the stone walls. King Aldrich, surrounded by his most loyal guards, strode purposefully through the torch-lit corridors. The clash of steel against steel echoed from distant chambers, evidence that Duke Harwick's men had already begun their treasonous assault. "To the eastern tower," the king commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. Princess Alara was moved there for her protection. The irony was not lost on him. Just days ago, he had publicly humiliated this woman for his court's amusement. Now he raced through his own castle to protect her from nobles who feared her very existence threatened their power. As they rounded a corner, Lord Cedric appeared, breathless from running. "Your Majesty," he gasped, "Duke Harwick has rallied 6 nobles to his cause. They claim they act to protect the kingdom from foreign usurpation." "Protect their stolen lands, more like," the king growled. "Where is Master Edmund?" "Gathering the documented land grants, the evidence of how your father redistributed Aldenvale's territories. He believes this may be crucial for whatever negotiations lie ahead." King Aldrich nodded grimly. The elderly advisor understood what was truly at stake, not just Princess Alara's claim, but the entire foundation upon which 15 years of rule had been built. They reached the base of the eastern tower just as a commotion erupted outside its heavy oak door. The sounds of struggle, shouts of anger and defiance carried down the spiral staircase. The king drew his sword, a gesture mirrored instantly by his guards. "Stand ready," he ordered, taking the stairs 2 at a time. What he discovered at the top of the tower stopped him in his tracks. The corridor outside Princess Alara's chamber was filled not with the expected clash of soldiers, but with a human barrier of castle servants, kitchen boys, chambermaids, stable hands, and laundresses. They stood shoulder to shoulder, armed with nothing more threatening than brooms, kitchen knives, and iron pots. Facing them were 6 of Harwick's men-at-arms, swords drawn but hesitating before this unexpected opposition. Behind them stood Duke Harwick himself, his florid face twisted with rage. "Stand aside, you fools!" the Duke was shouting. "This is noble business, not for the likes of you." "She's under our protection now," declared a grizzled cook, brandishing a cleaver with surprising authority. "No blue-blooded murderers getting past us tonight." The king's arrival caused all heads to turn. The servants' faces registered shock at finding their sovereign suddenly in their midst, but they held their positions, their improvised weapons still raised. "What is the meaning of this, Harwick?" King Aldrich demanded, though the scene spoke for itself. The Duke straightened, attempting to salvage his dignity. "Your Majesty, we act only to secure the realm against an impostor who would undermine your rightful rule. By attacking a woman under my protection? By raising arms within my castle without my command?" The king's voice was dangerously soft. "That sounds remarkably like treason, Duke Harwick." Before the Duke could respond, the chamber door opened behind the wall of servants. Princess Alara emerged, calm and composed despite the danger. She wore a simple night robe, her hair loosely braided for sleep, yet somehow she projected more regal authority than anyone else in the torchlit corridor. The servants parted respectfully to allow her passage, then closed ranks behind her. This simple gesture, their willingness to place themselves between danger and the woman they had known for mere days, struck Aldrich with unexpected force. In all his years of rule, through wars and harvests, festivals and famines, he had never inspired such spontaneous, selfless loyalty from the common people of his castle. "Princess Alara," the king acknowledged her formally, aware that his choice of address would reverberate throughout the castle by morning. "I see you've found protectors I hadn't appointed. The strongest fortress is built not of stone, Your Majesty, but of loyal hearts," she replied, inclining her head toward the servants who had risked their lives for her. Duke Harwick stepped forward, his face flushing darker with each passing moment. "She is the enemy," he shouted, all pretense of protocol abandoned. "She is the heir of Aldenvale, and we will not accept her." His declaration hung in the air like a thunderclap. He had publicly named what had until now been only whispered speculation. The servants' expressions showed no surprise. Clearly, they had already accepted this truth. But the Duke's open opposition to one Aldrich had just addressed as princess constituted a direct challenge to the king's authority. For the first time, the true gravity of the situation clarified in King Aldrich's mind. This was no longer about a mysterious woman or even a diplomatic complication. This was the moment when his reign would either solidify or fracture beyond repair. The choice before him was not political but moral, between clinging to power built on his father's treachery or finding a new path forward. Duke Harwick misinterpreted the king's silence as hesitation. "Your father gave my family the eastern provinces of Aldenvale as reward for our loyalty," he pressed. "3 generations of my ancestors fought for your father's claim. Would you undo all that for this woman's claim?" Princess Ilara's voice cut through the tension, surprisingly gentle, yet carrying to every ear. "Your family has farmed those lands well, Duke Harwick. The villages prosper under your stewardship." She stepped forward, her movement fluid and graceful. "Justice need not mean destruction of all that has been built." The Duke's expression wavered, confusion momentarily replacing anger. He had expected threats, not conciliation. In that moment of uncertainty, one of the kitchen boys stepped forward from the servant ranks. No more than 14 years old, his face smudged with flour, he addressed the assembled nobles with remarkable courage. "Begging your pardons, great lords, but we who work the land and keep your castles, we don't care about your borders and your claims. We care about justice." His voice strengthened with each word. "This lady spoke to us as people, not as furniture. She remembered our names. She asked after our families. That's why we stand for her." A chorus of agreement rose from the servants. The simple truth the boy spoke, that rulership was about more than bloodlines and documents, resonated through the corridor with undeniable force. King Aldrich looked from the boy to Princess Alara, then to Duke Harwick with his armed men, and finally to his own reflection in the polished surface of his sword blade. The face that stared back at him seemed suddenly unfamiliar, not the confident ruler he had believed himself to be, but a man precariously balancing atop a foundation of historical lies and convenient myths. In that moment of clarity, King Aldrich made his decision. He sheathed his sword and, to the astonishment of all present, knelt before Princess Alara in the torchlit corridor. "Princess Alara of Aldenvale," he said, his voice steady despite the murmurs of shock that rippled through both nobles and servants. "I ask your forgiveness for the mockery with which I once greeted you, for the gesture that sought to diminish your dignity before my court." The corridor fell silent. Duke Harwick stared in disbelief. The servants watched with wide eyes as their king humbled himself before the woman they had chosen to protect. Princess Ilara's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts, but her eyes, so often guarded, showed a flicker of genuine surprise. "Rise, King Aldrich," she said after a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Humiliation serves neither of us, nor the people we both would serve." As he stood, a new understanding passed between them, unspoken but profound. The path forward would not be simple, but in this moment, both had chosen dignity over pride, reconciliation over vengeance. Duke Harwick, seeing his position crumbling, made one desperate attempt to salvage his cause. "She has no proof," he cried out, "no documentation of her claim that would stand before a council of nobles." Princess Ilara turned to him, her gaze level and unflinching. "You are correct, Duke Harwick, in one respect. The final proof has remained hidden, awaiting the right moment for revelation." She looked back to King Aldrich. "That moment has come. Tomorrow, before the assembled court, I shall present the document that confirms not only my identity, but the true history of our kingdom's relationship." Murmurs erupted among the gathered witnesses. The king's expression remained carefully neutral, though inwardly he recognized that they now stood at the precipice of tremendous change. Whatever was revealed tomorrow would reshape the political landscape of the realm forever. "Until then," King Aldrich declared, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority, "Princess Ilara remains under my personal protection. Any threat against her will be considered treason against the crown itself." His eyes fixed on Duke Harwick. "Is that understood?" The Duke's rebellion collapsed as swiftly as it had formed. With the king's position now unmistakably clear, Harwick's men sheathed their weapons, and the Duke himself offered a stiff bow of acknowledgement, though his eyes burned with resentment. As the confrontation dissolved, Princess Ilara addressed the servants who had risked everything to protect her. "Your courage will not be forgotten," she promised them, her voice thick with emotion for the first time since she had entered the castle. "Whatever comes tomorrow, know that you have already changed the course of history." The simple folk beamed with pride at her words, standing taller in the presence of both royals. As the corridor cleared, King Aldrich remained alone with Princess Ilara. The torches flickered, casting their faces in alternating light and shadow. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said quietly. "Yes," she agreed. For better or worse, the truth must finally be spoken aloud. The unspoken question hung between them. Would that truth heal the wounds of the past, or tear open new ones that could never be mended? A revelation immoral. Dawn broke over the kingdom with an unusual clarity, as if the heavens themselves wished to bear witness to the day's momentous events. The great central plaza before the castle had begun filling with people since first light. Nobles in their finest garments, merchants in clean tunics, craftsmen who had abandoned their workshops, and farmers who had traveled through the night from outlying villages. Word had spread with extraordinary speed. Today, something unprecedented would occur. At the plaza's center stood a hastily constructed wooden platform, draped with the kingdom's colors. Royal guards formed a protective perimeter, their polished armor gleaming in the morning sun. Every window overlooking the square was crowded with faces. Every rooftop that offered a view bore clusters of eager onlookers. Inside the castle, King Aldrich stood before a mirror, adjusting his ceremonial crown. His reflection showed a man changed from the one who had mockingly given his horse to a beggar woman mere days ago. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His expression carried a gravity that had been absent before. "The nobles are restless, Your Majesty," Lord Cedric reported, standing at a respectful distance. "Duke Harwick has gathered his supporters near the eastern edge of the plaza. They wear their swords despite your decree against armed attendants." "Let them posture," the king replied, his voice steady. "After today, such displays will matter little." In her chambers, Princess Ilara prepared with the assistance of 3 handmaidens, castle servants, who had been among those who formed a human shield outside her door the previous night. They addressed her not in borrowed finery, but in a simple gown of deep blue, unadorned save for a single silver brooch bearing the forgotten crest of Aldenvale. Her hair was arranged in the traditional style of her homeland, with braids that symbolized wisdom encircling her head like a crown. "Are you afraid, my lady?" asked the youngest handmaiden, a girl of no more than 16 summers. Princess Ilara met the girl's eyes in the mirror. "Not of what comes today," she answered truthfully. "I have carried this moment within me for 15 years. Fear has long since turned to purpose." At precisely midday, when the sun stood directly overhead, the castle's great doors swung open. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as King Aldrich emerged, flanked by his royal guard and chief advisors. He took his place upon the platform, his expression solemn as he surveyed the sea of faces before him. Moments later, Princess Elara appeared in the doorway. She walked alone, carrying a small wooden box inlaid with silver. Her steps were measured, dignified, her gaze forward. As she crossed the courtyard toward the platform, something remarkable occurred. The common folk began to kneel, not in response to royal decree or tradition, but in spontaneous recognition of something they sensed in her presence. It began with the castle servants who had protected her, then spread outward like ripples in still water. Laborers, craftsmen, merchants, until thousands knelt before her path. The nobles remained standing, their expressions ranging from outrage to confusion, to calculating assessment. When Princess Elara reached the platform, she acknowledged the crowd with a graceful inclination of her head before taking her place beside King Aldrich. The contrast between them was striking, he in royal splendor with gold and jewels, she in unadorned dignity that somehow seemed more regal. King Aldrich raised his hands, and the crowd fell silent. "People of the realm," he began, his voice carrying across the plaza, "we stand at a crossroads of history. For 15 years I have ruled these united lands, believing my claim just and my authority absolute. Today, that certainty has been challenged by the appearance of one long thought lost to time." Murmurs swept through the crowd. The king continued, his voice strengthening. "I present to you Princess Elara of Aldenvale, rightful heir to the neighboring kingdom that was absorbed into our realm during my father's reign." The reaction was immediate. Gasps, shouts of disbelief, angry protests from nobles, and cries of vindication from commoners who had already accepted the truth. King Aldrich allowed the commotion to continue for several moments before raising his hands again for silence. "Her claim rests upon evidence she will now present to all assembled." He stepped back, ceding the center of the platform to Princess Elara. She stood before the multitude, her posture straight, her expression composed. When she spoke, her voice carried with surprising strength across the vast plaza. "People of both our kingdoms," she began, acknowledging the merged territories with a single phrase, "I come before you not seeking division, but truth, not vengeance, but justice." She opened the wooden box, removing an ancient parchment wrapped in oiled cloth. Carefully unfolding it, she held it aloft so that the royal seals, one in red gold wax, one in deep blue, were visible to those nearest the platform. "I hold in my hands the treaty signed by King Aldrich's father and my own, a pact of mutual protection, shared prosperity, and eventual unification through marriage rather than conquest. A treaty violated in blood and fire when Aldenvale was attacked without provocation or warning." Duke Harwick pushed forward through the crowd. "Convenient that such a document should appear after 15 years. He shouted, his face flushed with anger. "What proof have we that this is authentic?" Master Edmund stepped forward, his ancient voice surprisingly strong. "I witnessed the signing of this treaty, Duke Harwick. I recognize the unique watermark, the distinctive seal impression, and the particular phrasing used by our court scribes of that era. This document is genuine." Princess Elara's gaze swept across the assembled nobles. "I understand your fear. The truth threatens not just power, but identity. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are and how we came to our position." She turned toward the common folk. "But truth once spoken cannot be unheard. And the truth is that I am the rightful heir to Aldenvale, daughter of King Edric and Queen Lyra, whose lives were taken in an act of treachery that has been hidden beneath lies for 15 years. She held the parchment high once more. "I am the legitimate heir, but I do not come before you demanding a crown. I ask instead for justice and dignity, not just for myself, but for every person who lives upon this soil." These words drew tears from many in the crowd. Commoners who had never dared hope for justice from nobility found themselves moved by the simplicity and power of her declaration. King Aldrich stepped forward again, standing shoulder to shoulder with Princess Ilara. This gesture, placing them as equals before the people, was not lost on the observers. What Princess Ilara offers is a path forward that acknowledges the past without being imprisoned by it, he announced. Together we propose a new treaty, one that honors the original intent of unification while recognizing the reality of our joined peoples. A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. No one had anticipated this turn of events, not reconciliation but partnership between the two royals. Princess Ilara faced King Aldrich directly, her expression solemn yet touched with unexpected warmth. The gesture with which you once sought to humiliate me will indeed be remembered throughout history, Your Majesty. But equally remembered will be this moment, when you chose to be human first, monarch second. The king's composure faltered for the first time, genuine emotion breaking through his royal mask. Those closest to the platform could see the moisture in his eyes as the weight of her forgiveness settled upon him. She turned back to address the people, her voice rising with passionate conviction. The true measure of royalty lies not in crowns or castles, but in how we treat the most vulnerable among us, in whether we choose compassion when cruelty would be easier, in whether we recognize the humanity in every person, regardless of their birth or station. As she spoke, something remarkable happened among the assembled crowd. The divisions between noble and commoner, between those loyal to the old order and those hoping for change, began to dissolve. Her words touched something universal, the desire for dignity that resided in every heart. "I do not seek to claim a throne," she declared, her voice ringing across the hushed plaza. "I choose instead to be a bridge between what was and what might be, to transform the pain of my past into strength for our shared future." Duke Harwick and his supporters found themselves increasingly isolated as the mood of the crowd shifted. What had seemed a threat to the established order was revealing itself as something more complex, an opportunity for healing ancient wounds that had festered beneath the surface of the realm's prosperity. King Aldrich raised his hand, now clasping Princess Ilara's in a gesture of unity. "From this day forward, our kingdoms shall be truly united, not through conquest, but through mutual respect and shared governance. Princess Ilara will take her rightful place as co-regent of the combined realms, with equal authority in all matters of state." The announcement sent ripples of astonishment through the crowd. Such power sharing was unprecedented in the realm's history. Yet as the implications settled, a swell of approval rose from the common folk, who sensed that their lives would improve under the guidance of one who had known their struggles firsthand. "Let it be known." Princess Ilara's voice rose above the growing sounds of celebration, "that true nobility comes not from bloodlines or titles, but from the dignity that persists even in the face of humiliation, from the courage to speak truth to power, from the strength to forgive without forgetting." Tears flowed freely now among the assembled people. Hardened soldiers, weathered farmers, nobles who had never shown emotion in public, all found themselves moved by the transformation unfolding before them. A kingdom divided by history was finding a new path forward through the wisdom of a woman who had experienced its injustices from the lowest position. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, King Aldrich and Princess Ilara stood together before their united people, living symbols of a profound truth that would echo through generations to come: that the greatest power lies not in domination, but in reconciliation, not in vengeance, but in vision, not in crowns and thrones, but in the unquenchable dignity of the human spirit. And in the hearts of all who witnessed this day, a lesson took root that would be passed down through countless generations. True royalty is revealed not in the trappings of power, but in the moments when we choose compassion over cruelty, understanding over ignorance, and hope over hatred, even when every instinct cries out for retribution. For in the end, it was not a kingdom that was transformed that day, but the very notion of what it meant to rule and to be truly noble. As our tale comes to a close, we're left to ponder the true nature of dignity and power. Princess Alara chose forgiveness when vengeance would have been easier, transformation when retribution was within her grasp. Would you have found such strength after years of suffering? Could you have seen beyond personal pain to envision a better future for all? The king's journey reminds us that our worst mistakes often become our greatest opportunities for growth. His public mockery, intended as a moment of cruel amusement, became the catalyst for profound change in his kingdom and in his soul. Perhaps there are moments in our own lives where what seems like humiliation is merely the first step on a path to something greater. If this story touched your heart, remember that dignity isn't something others can take from you. It's an inner flame that burns brightest in our darkest moments. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to continue our journey through tales that remind us of our common humanity. And leave a like if you believe, as Princess Alara did, that true nobility comes not from crowns and castles, but from how we treat one another when no one is watching.